Hey everyone, welcome to Dr. Frank's Finance World. I am Dr. Frank, the bank, the guy who tries to teach you something about finance so you can pocket more money in the future. Please be sure to subscribe and hit notifications if you're interested in getting future ones. Look at the notes. We fill these in after the fact, but they do come around, and I'm going to try to figure out how to put PDF files and so on in there too. And then check out the books in our bookstore. Got some pretty good stuff there. Part of forming portfolios is there are actually some strategies you can think about. One of them is called a core with satellites. This is sort of the hub and spoke, kind of like FedEx does, for instance. Another one is a barbell, where you might have risk, low risk, high risk, a bunch of different ways of doing that. And the other one is to take one of these strategies maybe and put some tactical allocation, increase risk or decrease risk a little here and there based on what's actually going on in the market at that time. So we're going to compare these options and go over how I do that in my MBA class as well. So our core with satellites is pretty simple if you really think about it. It's simply you have a core group of portfolios, and around that core you will put other smaller holdings. The core could be something, value stocks or whatever it is that you think are interesting or related to meeting the risk requirements that you have and so forth. And you can have one or more other satellites out here that may represent sort of bets on certain industries or a sector or whatever out here. So the core and satellite's pretty popular one. Idea with the core is essentially stay invested in here all the time, and or most of the time at least. And then the satellite ones is where you increase the risk tactically here and there to try to do better than the market. So that can represent a lot of different things. Could be lots of different trades. Risk, you could have risk versus out here versus no risk. You could have large in here versus small holdings, or not small holdings, but small stocks or whatever. You could have certain sectors and big holdings here with just certain industry weightings that you put out here. But the idea being is you have one main core that you hold on most of the time, if not all of the time. There's also a barbell strategy. I've seen this a lot when you talk about bonds and so forth, where basically you'll have maybe some short-term bonds on one side and long-term bonds on the other, and not much in between. Stocks could be done this way. You can use a combination of mutual funds or stocks or ETFs or whatever out there. But the idea is somewhat similar in the sense that you may have small stocks on this end or small stock ETFs on this end and large stocks on this one. You may have a little bit of international exposure with a lot of local exposure, stateside or whatever. You may have low risk on one side and you may have high risk on the other. These do not have to be the same size. You could have a big barbell on one and a small on the other, but the idea being is you sort of have a conglomeration of holdings at one end or the other with a theme typically related to risk or some other basic strategy. Another one is just to simply look at tactical allocations, which industries, which sectors, what stocks do I need to be in. Essentially bets where you increase or decrease a holding in there. The size of the holding, i.e. the dollar amount and percent of your portfolio that's into it and so forth. It can be to increase or decrease risk around one of the other portfolio strategies, for instance, portfolio strategies, if you're thinking about it. And these do tend to change based on the information or the economy. So tactical, I tend to think of as sort of the short-term bets, while the other ones are the longer term. How do you compare portfolios? I do this at JBA Wealth, and I do it in my MBA program as well. Got the idea of a number of years ago, but basically, most people out there have the majority of their wealth tied up in their portfolio at work. So how do you know how much to put in each of those? And the way I do that is I actually pull their holdings and then I compare it to indexes. And sometimes I will drop in other possible holdings. So it's a combination of what they hold now or what they could hold and compare it relative to the market. Keep in mind, in 401ks and those type things, they tend to have more conservative holdings for the most part because they don't want to get it sued when you don't make any money or you lose money and that sort of stuff. But you can sort of get around that by changing the weightings of stuff that is more aggressive, put more money in and that kind of stuff. But how it ultimately looks is something like this. Oh, that's not it, right? Here it is. So this I actually took from somebody's portfolio in the MBA program I did before. These are the mutual funds that they actually owned. And so the question is, all you have to do is you go inside of Yahoo Finance and you put in one of them, and then you hit the chart and it opens up to this, of course, without these other things in here. And then I came up here and I put in comparison, and I would add the ticker symbol WATFX, and the purple line would show up. Or I would go in and put in MADVX as the ticker symbol right here, and then the pink line would show up. And it looks like the brown line, GTSCX, is done the best over the last period of time for these guys and gals in this portfolio, this family, is what I was actually looking at. So the interesting thing is what does it look like over a shorter and long period of time? Let's look at it from a 6-month time period. So you get a little bit different. You can see that most of the gain for this is starting with a 0% return and all of these gains and so forth. The biggest return was this GTSCX, but that's not much of a different return over the last 6 months than over the last 5 years. And how do you really know if that's a good return or not? One of the other neat comparisons that's available up here is you can compare it to the S&P 500, and it will put a blue line in there, and you'll see where that is. And you can compare it to the NASDAQ, the small stock indexes out there, and it'll put in a purple line for that one. And you can see that over the short term, it hasn't done too badly. Some of them have actually beaten those indexes. What about over the last year? Well, the light blue is the S&P, the purple one is the NASDAQ. Let's go, and the brown one has done relatively well as well, that GTSCX. What about at 2 years? You can see that the S&P now is above the GTX, and the NASDAQ is coming out. If we look out to 5 years, you'll now typically see the NASDAQ has outperformed this particular group of mutual funds that were available, as has the S&P. So over the long run, these big indexes do tend to do better, and they are very efficient in the sense that the expenses for them are fairly low. So if you want to compare your own portfolio out there, find out what your option sets are at work. We're very fortunate at Colorado State University because they allow Fidelity to be the group that we get to go through. Not that Fidelity is so great, but they're not bad. But they have over 200 different options, which allows a guy like me, a finance professor, the chance to sort of pick and choose what sectors, industries, whatever I want to be in. And it can be very, very helpful when I'm allocating, particularly during time periods like the last year or so that's been a rough period over the 2022 time period. So anyway, that's how I actually go about and compare this. I call it Portfolio DocX because that was actually the name of the file that I went to pull that stuff up. So, Portfolio Part 3, I love Benjamin Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor. When you read it, you're going to go, oh, it's so old school. He uses old words and stuff. True, but I guess the thing that I like about old school stuff is it goes back to show you that things don't really change. The strategies and stuff that he used back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s will still work in the 20s, 70 years later. So let's see what research has to say about forming portfolios. I pulled that one up over here. And this is interesting. Navigating the skew, you're looking at the fact that stock returns are not perfectly symmetric. They're not a normal sort of bell-shaped curve. And what does it mean when you talk about indexes? We talked about this a lot last year. The most popular ETF is, of course, is the SPY, which is the S&P 500. In 2020, it had a return of 18.35%. Despite the economic slowdown. So why was that? Because the FANG stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, Microsoft as well, they did very well. As a matter of fact, of the 18.35%, those 6 stocks alone were 10.8% of that return. So the other 493 stocks or 494 stocks made up the other 6%, which was not so awesome. So over half the return of the index. Simultaneously, 2/3 of the S&P stocks performed worse than the index. So it was more likely you were actually going to pick a loser than a winner. It's a phenomenon that's not that unusual. One of the things that we watch, at least at JBA on my side of the desk, is we have watched for the concentration of the top 10 holdings. in indexes like that. And more importantly, perhaps, is whether they are trading at high price earnings multiples. We saw in the last one, we prefer low, but are they historically expensive compared to where they were, which is exactly what happened. So when you saw the market start to come down toward in 2021, especially in 2022, the S&P constituents, exactly Facebook, Apple, Amazon, all the rest, were down anywhere from 30 to as much as 40, 50, 60%. So the people who owned individual positions in these got clobbered, and they did a great job of pulling the index down. So how do you actually get around this? It's not always going to be true on your work portfolio. They may not have this option, but in the real world, you can actually buy the S&P, not market cap weighted, not where the 6 stocks, 7 stocks are, half or more of the returns, but you can actually buy what they call equally weighted. And what that means is there's an equal amount of money in each. And in doing so, it puts more emphasis on the smaller stocks and less emphasis on these ones that have run up so much. So that's one thing that you could do to get around it. But anyway, they have a strategy here if you want to go read this, and they talk about that as well. Anyway, so what is my strategy / tip? Try a core, whether it's a barbell or a core strategy, core satellite of indexes. The S&P, the NASDAQ, there's actually over 200 different indexes out there, but wrap your money around being part of the market and making it cheap. And then the satellites is where you take your bets on the sectors or the stocks that you think will do particularly well. That would be my strategy for forming portfolios based on the different strategies here. So don't forget to send your emails and comments and suggestions, please, and send something to Ask Dr. Frank. Appreciate you. Have a nice day. We'll catch you later. Bye-bye.